If you go down to the woods today, you'll have a brilliant time because they're full of ghosts, witches, fairies like me, and all sorts of cool stuff. Over a quarter of a century ago, historian and arborist Thomas Pakenham published this book, Meetings with Remarkable Trees, and it totally changed the way I looked at them.
This is not a conventional book about trees. It will not help you identify them, let alone cultivate them. It's a personal selection of 60 remarkable individuals or groups of trees, mostly very large and mainly very ancient, and all with a strong personality.
Remarkable individuals like this one here behind me, known as Cromwell's tree, standing here alone in this field in Scotland, where his troops camped during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. On my wanderings, I've met many such remarkable trees, photographed them, taken bits of video, I've even hugged a couple of them. So this is a kind of cobbled together journey around Scotland in search of some of the more mysterious ones. And now a quick pilgrimage to a holy well close to the town of Dumfries. This fine avenue of trees leading to it is known as the Queran Beeches. And next to the well is an archaeological site known as Picts Knoll, or Hill of the Picts. There's a debate whether this is a henge or a fort. Either way, it shows this area has been inhabited for a very long time. We tend to take fresh drinking water for granted a bit in 21st century Scotland, but it really is the sacred foundation of life. In pre-Christian times, springs were important places of worship, and water was a key element in Celtic mysticism. Many of these spiritual practices involved some kind of offering given to or left by the water. As Christianity spread from Ireland to Scotland in the 6th century, many of these springs were assimilated into the new faith, blessed and rebranded as holy wells. The Celtic goddesses and spirits associated with them were replaced by saints. In this case, St. Queran, who was a 6th century abbot of Kintyre. The wells became popular with pilgrims on their way to major religious sites like Whittle. They believed that praying at these wells and shrines might cure them of illness or forgive their sins and give them a better chance of going to heaven. In the 19th century, the well was cleared out and they found coins dating back to 1560. Any dating earlier would probably have been dissolved by the spring water. The coins came from all over, Scotland, England, Ireland and even France. In addition to coins, we have offerings of cloth or cluties and trinkets which are left on the branches of the trees around the well. Although wells were considered Christian shrines, many of the practices and rituals surrounding them date back to pagan time, and the most popular time to visit a well was Beltane, or the first Sunday in May. This particular well was held in great repute for the cure of diseases, particularly in women and children. After the Reformation, the wells were viewed by the Church as, at best, Catholic, at worst, witchcraft. The Presbytery of Dumfries in 1614 declared the well idolatrous. In 1629, the Privy Council again denounced them in the strongest terms.
Now, it was declared that, for the purpose of restraining the superstitious resort in pilgrimages to chapels and wells, which is so frequent and common in this kingdom, to the great offence of God, scandal of the Kirk, and disgrace of His Majesty's government, that commissioners cause diligent search at all such parts and places where this idolatrous superstition is used.
In many cases, the wells were destroyed to prevent people from using them. However, sometimes the wells were reopened in secret by the local population. In 1650, a woman named Janet Dixon was reported to have taken her young, sick child to the well. She washed the child and its clothes in the water, then
ran thrice with skins round thorn tree beside the well.
For this, she was tried and convicted as a witch. For all that, as we can see, the trees around the well are still in use. And the tradition of using spring water to heal illness lived on through the Victorian spa boom and into the present day. When I did the first incarnation of this talk to the Fortean Society in 2017, there was one site I wanted to visit and include above all others, and this is it. And it's not an easy place to visit for all sorts of reasons. Loch Maree in Westeros is 20 kilometres long, and it's the largest freshwater loch north of the Great Glen. It's a spectacular location, with its backdrop of mountains, including the mighty Slioch, or the Spear in Gaelic. But it's the islands we've come to visit. There are more than 60 of them scattered across the loch, Isolated from the land and now a protected scientific reserve, they hold the nearest thing to natural woodland left in Britain, a fragment of the ancient Caledonian pine forest with a seed bank stretching back into prehistory. These islands have had little interference from people or grazing. This really is Scotland's lost world. That is, except one. Isle Maree. This is a Victorian Ordnance Survey map of the island. We can see it is heavily wooded and there's a path running north to south. There's a well, a burial ground, and a mysterious circular structure in the middle. The mapmaker's notes say, on the island there is an old burial ground and has a dried up well, which has some curious tradition about it. Thomas Pennant, in his 1775 book, A Tour in Scotland and a Voyage to the Hebrides, describes the Holy Well as a place of pilgrimage for cases of lunacy. It was believed that if a patient drank water from the well, they would be cured of any mental illness. And beside the well, as Pennant writes, was a tree which acted as an altar, where people would leave their offerings to the Saint Melrua. This photograph, from a century ago, shows the well and the oak tree. You might just make out coins in the bark and clooties hanging nearby. In 1877, Queen Victoria stayed at the Lochmaree Hotel with her trusty friend, John Brown. This is from her diary. Sunday the 16th of September 1877. A most beautiful bright morning.
Went with Beatrice and the Duchess of Roxburgh in a 4-oared gig steered by the landlord of the hotel, and were rowed across to the Isle of Maree, which one cannot see from the house, as it is concealed by some of the larger islands. It was lovely on the blue, calm loch, passing through those wooded and rocky islands, and not a sound, excepting that made by the oars. The boat was pushed on shore, and we scrambled out and walked through the tangled underwood and thicket of oak, holly, birch, ash and beech which covers the islet, to the spot where there is the celebrated well, now nearly dry. It is said to be celebrated for the cure of insanity. An old tree stands close to the well, into the bark of which it has been the custom from time immemorial for everyone who goes there to insert a copper coin with a hammer as a sort of offering to the Saint Melrua, who lived there in the 7th century. Some say that the name of Maree was derived from Melrua or Melrog, as the saint is also sometimes called. There are also rags and ribbons tied on the branches of the tree. We duly put and hammered in some pennies. Went on to where there are some very old gravestones, amongst which 2 of a Norse or Danish prince and princess, about whose untimely death there is a romantic story. The remains of the old wall of the monastery are still to be seen. The island is barely a 1/4 of a mile across and in circumference. Walked along the beach and picked up pebbles. Then rowed back as we came, which is 20 miles. 4 very decent-looking young farmers rowed the boat.
It's important to note the trees she mentions. The other islands on the loch are pristine Caledonian forest of Scots pine and juniper. Isle Maree, on the other hand, is covered in a whole pick and mix of oak, ash, Scots pine, willow, birch, hazel, holly, sweet chestnut, and obviously has been like this for a long time. And this island has had an even more illustrious visitor. Back in 1979, His Majesty Tom Weir knocked a coin in here during an episode of Weir's Way. St Melrua, also known as Mourie, which is where the loch and island get their name, was an early Christian missionary who came to Scotland and helped found the monastic community of Applecross in 673 AD. He seemed to have assimilated much of the local pagan traditions, almost to the point of going native. Certainly many pre-Christian practices survived here long after they had declined elsewhere. There are 17th century church records that refer to bull sacrifice on the island.
Oh God! Oh Jesus Christ!
There are also many references of local people referring to the saint as a god, the god Maree. It is said that he stayed on the island as a place of retreat, and there are remains of what appears to be monastic cells and a circular stone structure that could be part of those or predate it. It is thought the island was sacred to the Druids, the loch being aligned from east to west. Some also believe it has connections to the moon goddess, which might account for the island's reputation for curing lunacy. The cure worked like this. Before docking, the boat with the ill person on board would circle the island 3 times clockwise. On each lap, the patient, who had a rope tied round them, would be plunged into the freezing water. Upon landing, the patient was taken to the well and given some of its water to drink. Then an offering was made by nailing a rag or a ribbon to the tree, or by driving a coin into it edgewise. Similar, but perhaps less drastic rites were recorded right up until 952. Naturally, the post-Reformation Church was not too impressed by such activities. In 1656, the Presbytery of Dingwall proclaimed,
"And with all their adoring of wells and other superstitious monuments and stones, tedious to rehearse, have appointed as follows, that whosoever shall be found to commit such abominations, especially sacrifices of any kind or at any time, shall publicly appear and be rebuked."
And in 1678,
Mr. Roderick Mackenzie, minister of Gairloch, summoned by his officer to this presbytery day Hector Mackenzie in the parish of Gairloch, as also John Murdoch and Duncan Mackenzie's sons to said Hector, as also Kenneth Mackenzie his grandson, for sacrificing a bull in an heathenish manner in the island of commonly called Isle Maree, for the recovering of the health of Christine Mackenzie, spouse to the said Hector Mackenzie, who was formerly sick and valetudinaire.
now to the burial ground, on one of the reputed Viking graves. Legend tells that they are a prince and princess who died tragically in a test of faith. Very similar story to Romeo and Juliet. And this is the grave of the last person to be buried on the island, Alexander Robertson, owner of the Loch Maree Hotel. In 1922, the hotel provided a fishing party of 30, with packed lunches of potted wild duck paste sandwiches imported from London. They went out for a day on the loch, but then nearly all became seriously ill. 8 people lost their lives within a week. The worst botulism food poisoning tragedy in Britain. He was cleared of all charges, but died not long after. Some say of a broken heart. Others say suicide. In his 2018 book, the author and naturalist Bob Gilbert introduces us to an urban landscape haunted by ghost trees. Can our environment really be haunted by such things? Well, let's ask him. Hello, Bob.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Ghosts and trees, that ticks quite a lot of boxes for me. Can you explain how a tree becomes one of the undead?
It's not so much spectral, Stuart. It's based on a concept that actually exists in ecology, and it's the concept of something called ghost hedges. You know, in the medieval period and onwards, as we were creating enclosures, and there's thousands of miles of hedgerows that we have in this country, we did it in a variety of ways. And sometimes they were planted, but at other times, actually, what happened was you took a woodland and you destroyed most of the woodland for planting, just leaving a strip of it to separate the fields and stop the livestock wandering. And within those strips, you would actually have the seed bank of a lost woodland. So for years and years to come, actually, you'd have these woodland plants springing up along these hedgerows as a kind of shadow, you know, a remnant of what once was. And so they were called ghost hedges. Really just taken that idea for the idea that there are many features, although they are lost, still leave in some way their mark or their influence on the land. You know, these ghostly remnants of the tree, they can manifest themselves in all sorts of ways. So, for example, it might just be in place names. I mean, I live in Poplar, a part of the East End of London, where the whole area is named after a tree which is no longer found here. This was the marshlands, where this was the commonest tree. There isn't one of them left now, but the whole area still bears that memory of what the land was. But there are other, you know, for example, sometimes in the layout of a street or the layout of an estate, you can actually see the field boundaries are still preserved that were once there. Or sometimes the influences are more subtle still. So that again, they enter the kind of cultural memory of the area. And here in Poplar, for example, both the council and the local housing association developed logos for the area, which incorporated this tree which is no longer.
So in Scotland, socky means willows, and a haw is a kind of river meadow. So does that mean somewhere under the TK Maxx on Socky Hall Street, there's a lost rural idyll?
Almost certainly there is. I mean, place names do reveal a great deal about what was previously in an area. I mean, in London, I counted 36 different place names, different locations, not streets, but areas of London which were named after trees or woods. And if you and then other features as well, like meadows or rivers or farms or wild features. One of the things I did in my book was trace, and these are another kind of ghostly impact on the landscape. I traced the route of a lost river using just the contours of the city streets. So we followed this whole river called the Black Ditch through East London. I actually doused it with a water artist as well. But to be honest, I think tracing it through the geographical features and the contours of the pavement was probably more successful than our dousing.
So have you actually ever encountered a ghost tree that is itself haunted?
I suddenly remember that as a child, my siblings and I, we actually believed that this is in the heart of Bermondsey in South London, that a tree next to the railway arches, we really believed it was haunted. And the ghost was called Percy. I have no idea why it was Percy or what Percy might have done. And they certainly occur a great deal in literature. I know you are familiar with M.R. James, and one of the best stories of a haunted tree is the ash tree. But Wordsworth had this idea that all trees are a kind of ghostly memory of the earth. So that all trees in a way are ghosts. And I must just say, in concluding on this question, lots of trees do have particular spirits attached to them. And in particular, if you look into the story of the hazel in different parts of the country, the hazel it has the hind ettin, it has the melch dick, it has milk churn peg, depending on what area you live in. So, I mean, I do love that idea that particular trees have particular protective spirits attached to them. And whether I believe in them or not is a different matter. But I can tell you, I would not cut a branch of hazel without asking protection from the spirit first.
So, if something lost from the past is left etched into the fabric of our environment, one might almost be forgiven for thinking. Well, maybe, but not quite. We'll see. Right, let's go ghost hunting. Here we are in Corstorphine, Edinburgh, and I sense our presence is close. So where is the sycamore? I mean, this thing was massive, over 4 centuries old, and at one time considered the largest in Scotland. The tree is commemorated as a symbol of the village. It's the badge of the local bowling club, and it's here in the street names. The story goes, a monk brought the tree as a sapling from the east in the early 15th century. It grew tall and outlived the castle in whose grounds it was planted, of which only the old dovecot remains. But on a dark and stormy night of the 26th of December 1998, the old tree came down. But if you visit the excellent Corstorphine Heritage Centre in the old Dower House, you can see fragments of the great tree and some of the items that were carved from its fallen timber. So here lies our ghost tree. But this is a double haunting, as the tree itself is haunted by another ghost. Christian Nimmo, the White Lady. Back in 1679, Corstorphine Castle was owned by James Bailey, a defeated royalist and rake who'd fallen on hard times and was up to his ears in debt. James was uncle to Christian Nimmo, a married woman. Neither of these facts stopped Bailey, and Christian ended up bearing his child. And now he was carrying on with one Bessie Ritchie, and had got her pregnant too. The elders from the local church met to discuss their outrage at the laird's fornication. But given that in their words, "This lordship is a person of quality," they fudged it. Meanwhile, Christian took matters into her own hands. On the evening of the 26th of August, 1679, Bailey was out drinking, and Christian sent word for him to meet her under the sycamore tree. There she confronted him about his infidelity. Bailey was drunk. "In which condition," Christian said, "he commonly was very furious. He lunged at her with his sword." Claiming she grabbed the sword to save herself, but in the ensuing struggle, Bailey accidentally impaled himself on it. Whoops. Arrested, she was taken to Edinburgh Tollbooth Jail. Christian confessed to murder. It's likely she spent the last day of her life behind the door of the condemned cell, which just happens to be downstairs. You'll pass it on your way down. After a couple of failed escape attempts, she was beheaded at the Mercat Cross on the 12th of November, 1679. Her method of execution was the maiden, an early form of guillotine, which is now on display at the National Museum of Scotland. But her spirit returned to haunt the tree. A market gardener in the nearby Woodbine nursery claimed that often seen her ghost and referred to her as his White Lady. And in 1981, a weaver at the Dovecote studio beside the tree saw a ghostly woman walking down the grass towards the road. And we actually have rare photographic evidence. It's on display at the Heritage Centre. As with all these pictures of ghosts, you need to use a little bit of imagination. Could just be a light anomaly. But if you look closely, you can just about make out the white outline of a ghostly figure. Some say that you can even see the bloody murder weapon in her hand. It was a very special tree. It was a botanical species in its own right, rejoicing in the name of Acer pseudoplatanus corstorphinesis. It doesn't produce seeds, and it can only be propagated from cuttings. When the Reverend James Oliver saw the tree in 1795, he noted that in the end of May and the beginning of June, it exhibits an appearance of the most striking beauty. The side which is exposed to the sun, in the colour of the leaves, is of the richest vivid yellow hue. And though the grand old Corstorphine sycamore may have gone, several of its children, grown from cuttings, are thriving. 2 stand tall in the nearby park, and this one in the churchyard of the kirk is becoming a worthy contender for the title of the Corstorphine sycamore. Throughout history, trees have been good to us. They've provided us with materials for warmth, shelter and food. And of course, being us, we've also used them to kill each other. From the moment we picked up the first stick and beat someone with it, to the technological advancements in weaponry, from ancient warfare through to the Renaissance and beyond. The ash was favoured for spears, the yew for longbow, and the poplar for arrows. But all those things are fashioned from wood. What about an entire living tree being used as an instrument of death? Once again, our insatiable appetite for killing finds a way. You could bend a couple of strong branches down, tie someone to them, and then let them spring back. Apparently, this was a punishment for adultery in the Roman army, which is strange because I've watched I, Claudius and I rather got the impression that this sort of behaviour was compulsory. But it was more usual simply to hang someone from one. The gallows tree, or as we called them in Scotland, Dule trees, which derives from the Gaelic word meaning grief. These were used for public hangings in less populated areas where a purpose-built gallows, as we would have had just outside here in the grass market, didn't make economic sense. And who would be entrusted to keep law and order? Naturally, those who had most to lose should it collapse. It's no surprise then that it's not uncommon to find a Dule tree in the grounds of a stately home. It's reported that in the 11th century, Scottish King Malcolm Canmore legislated that every barony was to have a tree for hanging convicted men and a pit of water for the execution of convicted women. Tradition has it this old sycamore at Leith Hall in Aberdeenshire was used as gallows to hang convicts. The hall was built in 1650 and was a family home for nearly 300 years, and in 1945 it was gifted to the National Trust for Scotland. Naturally, the place is full of ghosts. A World War I soldier, a little girl, and the sound of spectral bagpipes and drums. The best-known apparition is of John Leith III, who was killed on Christmas Day in 1763. He was shot in the head during a drunken brawl at Archie Campbell's Tavern in Aberdeen. Unsurprisingly, he's said to appear as a moaning man with a bandage over his eye. But before you think this sounds like a comedy series, most disturbing of all are the guest reports of nightmares of a face bending over them and the feeling of hands at their throat, or as if they were being smothered with a pillow. Of course, hangings aren't just a punishment for offenders. They are a warning to others. Think of the lynchings by American white supremacists in the 19th and 20th century. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. This is Gallows Hill, just north of Dundee. And the old beech tree you can see on top is believed to be just that. And as we found, a surprisingly difficult tree to reach. We were actually beaten back on our first attempt, by fading light, snow, and the mother of all fortified scout camps. On our second attempt, we tried an assault on the left flank, and were nearly foiled again by the sheer amount of fallen trees, toppled by storms Arwen, Malek and Corrie. During the Second World War, this was RAF Douglas Wood, a top-secret coastal early warning radar station, one of the most powerful weapons in what is today known as the Wizard War. Eat your heart out, Harry Potter. It's now a bit of a magnet for the urbex community. Rather them than me, you need ropes to get down and back out, and the place will be full of asbestos. But we got here, and you can see there are plenty of horizontal limbs to choose from. Absolutely perfect for a good clean drop. This tree must have been the end for a lot of people, and so it is for us. Train. Fucking plane now.